Welcome back. Joining us now is the Democratic candidate for the 14th Congressional District. It is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to me about why somebody would challenge an incumbent who has been in, and we all know Congressman Crowley is being mentioned as a possible Speaker of the House, and here you are saying, you know what, I can take him on.
Yeah. I think that right here in our own backyards, when we take a look at our leadership, you know, our leadership right now was appointed the seat initially. He never won a primary to get this seat in the first place. And we've had the same leadership for 20 years, and we haven't even had a primary election for 14 of those 20 years. So I think that first and foremost, we deserve a choice. We deserve to have an election and to have this discussion about who we are and what our priorities are. So I think it's important to kind of mount this challenge and really talk about the needs of working class Bronxites.
Talk about policies. What policies do you see as different from you and the congressman? Both Democrats, both presumably have some of the same instincts. But, so why policy-wise should somebody say Alexandria versus Joe?
It's an excellent question. First and foremost, the thing that distinguishes me most as a candidate is that I am the only person in this race that does not take corporate or lobbyist money. And I think that kind of informs all of our approaches to our policies. So we advocate for improved and expanded Medicare for all, a federal jobs guarantee, and that federal jobs guarantee includes things like a higher federal minimum wage and tuition-free public college. And I think one of the main differences is that when you don't take corporate money, the way you approach those policies really puts working families first.
Let's talk about the climate right now. Many of the things that you were talking about, and I know in a way you're a descendant of the Bernie Sanders campaign, are things that we heard then. We saw how the election, the presidential election turned out. We see which direction the country is going right now. Can these things become reality? And if people say, well, we put our faith in Ms. Ocasio, you know, we're going to be stuck in the same way we were the last time around.
So here's our, I think, the problem that we have right now, I think on our side of the aisle in terms of the Democratic Party, is that we have been so governed by decision-making based on fear, scared of what we have to lose, that we've kind of been pulling our punches and we've been hedging our bets. And what I think that this country actually really needs is bold, clear, progressive policies that are going to advocate for the economic, social, and racial justice of Americans. And I think that that's what's going to really mobilize the electorate. And that's one of the big things that we learned in 2016, that maybe it was that we didn't advocate and organize well enough or hard enough on these issues. And so I think that we really have a groundswell now, especially with this current administration. More people are paying attention now than ever. And we can organize that energy and we can really be ambitious.
This district has a very unique alignment because it includes every part of the Bronx is important, but important parts of the Bronx and so-called important parts of Queens. I don't mean to say anything negative about anybody's neighborhood. Do you see those, serving those people as different, or do you see them as, in essence, it's the same issues and I want to deal with it in the same way?
Well, what's really interesting about how NY14 is drawn, you've got neighborhoods on the Queens side, like Woodside, Sunnyside, Jackson Heights. You've got neighborhoods on the Bronx side, Parkchester, Castle Hill, Pelham Bay, or Pelham Parkway, up to Pelham Bay, City Island, Throgs Neck. And although that this district is drawn very strangely, there are a lot of mirror communities. So we have 3 peninsular communities that are all fighting the front lines of climate change right now: City Island, Throgs Neck, and on the Queens side, College Point. We have very heavy immigrant neighborhoods that really need championing and advocacy and safety right now. And those are similar on the Queens and Bronx sides as well. On the Queens, you have Jackson Heights. On the Bronx side, you have Parkchester and Castle Hill. So while there are certainly a lot of different neighborhoods, I think that there's a lot of commonalities, and there definitely was some intentionality behind whoever gerrymandered this seat and drew these lines.
You mentioned immigrants. Obviously, it is a flashpoint of controversy in America right now. I'm going to make an assumption that the congressman and you agree that what's going on is not appropriate. Give me an overall view. If you were a Congress member, what would you be lobbying for to affect what's going on now and, of course, deal with the system over the long term?
And this is an important difference, actually, between the congressman and I. I'm actually one of the first candidates in the country to come out in favor of the abolishment of ICE. And when I first came out with that position, people said, whoa, abolish ICE, what do you mean? And one of the things that we talked about was basically that ICE was established just in 2003. We had an immigration system before then, but what ICE did was take all of this enforcement outside of the oversight of the U.S. Department of Justice. And I think right now we're really seeing the consequences of that kind of lack of oversight with what's happening at the border and what's happening with family separations. And so I have a very aggressive stance that we need to remove that kind of authority for ICE to be doing these things without the full consent of Congress. And so,
how would you then police the borders? I mean, the level of policing is another question, but without ICE, then how do you enforce existing immigration rules?
Absolutely. So similar to how we enforced it before ICE, in that it doesn't mean that we just kind of eliminate all of our operations at the border, but what it does mean is that this becomes a criminal justice issue, and what it does mean is that we focus on the safety and documentation and checking the documentation of people who are crossing the border. Right now, what's happening is that anybody who is showing up is getting jailed, and even people who are seeking asylum are getting separated from their children. And so for me, something that is that serious really deserves the most serious response possible. And so I'm proud to be the only candidate to kind of draw that line in the sand about what this response should be.
Things like federal jobs guarantee, I don't want to lump it all together, but we don't have all day, but federal jobs guarantee tuition-free public college. Of course, if you look in the Bronx, specifically, we have big public housing needs, and much of that funding needs to come from the federal government.
Absolutely.
Right now, the climate is not to spend on those kinds of things. As a Congress member, how would you turn that around so that the things that you advocate for are not just pie in the sky?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think that we kind of bring to the table that's unique in this race is that I come with the lens as an experienced organizer. So what that means is that we look at our legislative priorities, but we also know how to really awaken communities and get communities mobilized to create that pressure across Congress, so that we're not just pushing for these priorities within the chamber, but that we're creating that pressure outside the chamber as well. The same way that we were able to kind of force changes and prevent some of the attempted changes to healthcare last year. So I think that what we really need to do is take our organizing to a different approach within Congress, and instead of just releasing press statements, to make sure that we're also building apparatuses to really truly be knocking on people's doors, not just when there's an election, but when there's legislation on the table.
We have about 45 seconds. One of the main obvious differences is experience. He's been in Congress for years. You obviously would be a newcomer. He has some wherewithal. We've already talked about what the possibilities are for him. Why would somebody say, yeah, I'll take somebody who hasn't been in office
Well,
before?
first and foremost, I live here, and I'm the only candidate that actually lives in this race. He lives full-time in Virginia, and I think that it's great for someone to have power, but we really need to be looking at what that power is being used for. And I think that as a resident of this community, as a member of the Bronx who actually lives here, I can best advocate for the needs of our communities here, because I live here. My family sends our kids to these schools, and I drink our water, and I go to our small businesses, and we have that finger on the pulse.
Thank you so much, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Good luck in the election, and we thank you for joining us on BronxNet Television. You and I, will be right back for more. Don't go away.